Hi everybody, welcome to the Guerin Report, coming to you from Kranji racetrack here in Singapore. It is Singapore Gold Cup Day. It should be an exciting day. It should be a day for celebration of the horse. Unfortunately, it is not. Today is the last ever race meeting at Kranji, the last ever race meeting effectively in Singapore, as the death of racing here comes to its funeral stage. To paraphrase and sum up what is happening here is, most basically, the government has said they want the land at Kranji, which is an enormous piece of land, back for housing. That is one thing that has happened, and that is the main reason today will be the last ever race meeting here. But of course, it's not just a story about land and economics and people. It is a story with many personal aspects to it. We're going to talk about some of those aspects, and today go hunting for the hows, the whys, and what could have been done differently to save Singapore racing. One of those personal stories is from a person we know so well back in New Zealand and Australia. Donna Logan moved here 7 years ago, and she has her final meeting in Singapore today. Her and husband Peter will return to New Zealand to train at a Briley Park. For her, this is home, a home that no longer exists after 5:30 tonight. We asked Donna about the emotional toll of the closure of racing here in Singapore.
It's pretty historical, isn't it? And emotions are very high. I farewelled one rider this morning who's been with me since the day I arrived in Singapore. He's actually ridden it here for 31 years. And I cried, just didn't want to, have to go through it. It's very, very tough.
It's obviously an economic story and a government story on some levels, but it's a very personal story for the people. When we were driving around the track this morning, these people are like a very large family.
Yeah, it is a big family. And like I say, some of these workers here have been in this industry and this job alone for their entire lives. And they're struggling to find replacement work. They haven't got the education. They've never worked with machinery, for an example. They've probably never driven a lorry. It's not that easy just to transit into something new.
Donna, you and Peter will head home and be training at a Briley Park, but I think for a lot of the people here, this might be, if they want to stay in Singapore, the end of their involvement in the industry.
Definitely. Most of the trainers have already planned where they're going. Some are taking a gap year as such and just going to travel. But a lot of them are, mainly the locals, are transferring to Malaysia because that's where they have to go. I think when we were announced of our closure, I said to the officials then, it's not like we can just walk out this front gate and walk into another job. We're quite unique in what we do, and there is no other racecourse here. There is, nothing else for us to do. We have to relocate.
You talk about the racetrack. It could do with a lick of paint. It could do with a bit of a do-up, but it's a beautiful facility and a purpose-built facility. It starts to make you wonder if some of these facilities with vets on site and all the things you have here at Kranji would be perfect for a greenfield back in New Zealand.
It's state of the art, and it's such an exceptional model how it has worked. I just can't believe that they spent $500 million building this. We'll never have this replicated again in the world because of the cost to do it. And, when you see facilities like this and they want housing, I don't know why they didn't condense it down, the racing, condense down the number of horses and have hotels and have housing and have an amusement park and make it such a big green field for Singapore, because they've never been allowed to advertise racing. There's young youth here that doesn't even know racing exists. And it's pretty sad when a country as small as Singapore has so many people living in it that don't even know there's a racecourse.
What about your horses? Some of them would head back to New Zealand, I presume. You told me one of them's been rehomed to Germany. So there's a lot of horses on this property even still today. There's 300. Where are they going?
I think that's actually gone quite smoothly. We were all very, very sceptical in the beginning. I'm down to 13 horses, and my horses have all got homes. One's gone to Germany, as we spoke of, to be a riding horse in Germany, but the others are all going to probably go to Malaysia to race, a few of them. Some of them we've got retirement homes for them in Malaysia at riding schools. And I know all the trainers have done their very best to make sure all the horses have been well looked after.
Home is always home. I know you look forward to getting back to New Zealand and you have family there, but you must have a lot of people here who it's hard to say goodbye to.
I'm the worst person in the world to say goodbye to. I cry when the office lady leaves at night. Very difficult. We have got some wonderful friends here, and it has been home, but I guess, as you say, home is home. And I've got probably a lot more friends at home than I have here. So, and the messages we're getting and welcome us back home, it probably makes the transition a bit easier.
Just for the horse people watching this, what's the difference between training a horse in Singapore compared with training them back in New Zealand? Because it's about 9 o'clock in the morning now and it feels like it's about 30 degrees.
I'd say it is 30, and it's a very different training procedure. You don't work them as hard. Your feeding is different because of the heat. It's been a really good training exercise for me, actually, and I look at horses in a different way. But as you can feel the heat now, I've never worn a jacket to the track or long trousers because it's at least 28 degrees every morning at 5 o'clock.
One other thing we don't have in New Zealand, which you had at the stables this morning, what appeared to be between an 8 and 10 foot long snake, Donna. So there's some challenges to training in Singapore.
Yeah, we get a lot of pythons here, cobras. So it's not unusual to see a python crawl through the tie-ups when you're going to saddle up your horses.
How do the horses cop that?
They're not as scared as you'd think. They're pretty, actually, the one thing about the horses here in training, they become very acceptable to most things. You don't drive around in golf carts at other training centres and they just walk past the golf cart driving along and don't care about it. So, yeah, they're pretty adaptable animals. Horses are amazing, to allow us to put them in a plane and fly them from New Zealand or Australia to Singapore. Half a tonne of animal, what other animals allow that? So, yeah, they're pretty accustomed to the old snake crawling past.
What have the range of emotions been like, Donna, since what was a very shock announcement about the closure and now what's felt like a funeral procession to get us to the last meeting on Saturday?
Look, it was a frustration and anger initially at the announcement. Everybody was very head up about it, obviously. But once the government here makes a decision, there's no turning back. So I think we all kind of accepted it. But I must say, in the last week, the emotions on all the trainers' faces, everybody's just drained, just down.
The product has been damaged in the last couple of years by people who have left, people who have said, I'm getting ahead of the curve here, I'm leaving, and it's hard to attract the best jockeys when they know they have no future here. Is this product, Singapore racing, in your belief, worth saving?
Absolutely. This product could be bigger than Hong Kong. Our facilities are, as I said, state of the art. The betting turnover has never looked better in the last few years. And all of a sudden, everybody in Singapore, like tomorrow, wants to go to the races because they know it's finishing. If they just let us advertise our product like they did of days gone by, you just go back 15 years and look at the crowds, look at the sponsorship, Singapore Airlines. It was big. We had horses coming from Hong Kong, Australia, New Zealand to race for the international races. There's no reason it couldn't be turned. Absolutely.
There seems to be, when you're in the CBD of Singapore, a disassociation. It seems to be almost like it's not part of the fabric here anymore, which I'm told it was 20 years ago.
Absolutely. And again, it all comes down to the fact that the youth of Singapore were never allowed to come to the races. They were never given any information about racing. And this is a huge lesson for all the other jurisdictions of racing throughout the world, to make sure they have people in and running racing and in government with racing interests, with knowledge of racing. The youth of today in Singapore don't even know about racing because it's not allowed to be advertised. They see it as a form of gambling and they look down on it. It's a sport. It's not just gambling. It's the love of the animal. The people that come now that haven't ever been to a race meeting stand there and hear those hooves thundering down the straight, they just say, what excitement is this? So, all the other countries around the world must take notice. Keep your advertising up, keep the youth involved, and get people in running their racing jurisdictions that have the knowledge of racing. Most of our people that have run the course here have been transferred from government departments and had no racing experience or background. And they're lovely people and they do a good job, but it really helps when you have some knowledge about racing.
5:30 Saturday night, you'll take the saddle off a horse after the Gold Cup, and that'll be it. That'll be racing done in Singapore. It's going to be a tough night.
Yeah, it's something you don't ever plan. You're never prepared to know exactly how I will feel, but I'm a great one to look forward. I don't look back. It's been good. I've loved it. Peter and I have had a great life living here for 7 years, but it's going to even be better when we get home. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, tough times for Donna and Peter Logan, but as Donna said, always looking forward to returning home and making the most of the new opportunities back there. She is, though, the latest in a long line of wonderful New Zealand trainers like Laurie Laxton, the late Laurie Laxton. Mark Walker, of course, had a big impact here. People like Stephen Gray, who have done so much here for Singapore racing, who will today and this weekend be saddened by what is happening. That's some of the emotional toll of the closing down, the death of racing here in Singapore. One of the best placed people to talk about the whys and where things started to go wrong is Eric Coe. He is a former official of the club, a well-respected bloodstock personality around the world with an understanding of how the geopolitics of racing works in other jurisdictions. We sat down with Eric to ask him what went wrong and whether Singapore racing is actually worth saving. Eric, you've been involved in so many different levels of Singapore racing for such a long time. How does it feel knowing it all ends on Saturday?
So we're down to the last few days. So definitely the pressure is very real, and it's been mounting up, and it's just the D-Day is coming, and we are just feeling the tension and the pressure, and it's come to a stage where I think not just myself, quite a number of us, we are just thinking, just let's get it over and done with, and we're just looking forward to the day after 5th of October.
What are some of the key factors that ended up with the Singapore Turf Club where it is now, and the decision made by the government from, say, 20 years ago when Singapore racing was very vibrant?
I think we can't attribute to any one single factor or decision, but I would say it's more like a series of poor or very bad decisions especially over the last maybe 15 years. And I think the fatal blow and if I may say, the stupidest decision was to give up the wagering rights to horse racing. So
in that you mean the Singapore Turf Club, rather than being in charge of the gambling aspect of the business, put those under what's basically the state-run government lottery business?
Correct. So Singapore Turf Club and the sister company, Singapore Pools, basically Singapore Pools runs the lottery side of things and sports betting, which the Turf Club would have gotten the rights to. But anyway, that's another story. And so as turnover, the wagering on horse racing went downhill, I think someone made the decision to just hand it over, choosing the easy way out, to give up the core revenue generating business of the Singapore Turf Club. And I think that was the most fatal mistake of the century, if I may say.
For racing fans watching this around the world, they would say, well, did the Singapore Turf Club argue or lobby hard enough to keep racing alive in this country? Do you think they did?
I think not enough. Even if they did, it wasn't quite enough, because so if we were just presenting during COVID or post-COVID, immediately post-COVID, if we were just presenting the pure figures without presenting what could have been or what could be done or how it could be improved. So I would say the ministries, they weren't quite getting the true and accurate picture of how racing could have continued on. So I think or I believe there was a lack of representation coming from the racing industry or the ministries, even the prime ministers. I don't think they got the true accurate picture of how racing could have been run or how the wagering could have improved on without the need for any stipend from the government or subsidies from the government, which was a fear because at one stage there was a fear that horse racing would go into deficit and we would need government funding. But I still believe till today that we wouldn't have needed any funding and we would have been self-sustaining at least.
You can't go to the races in Singapore if you're under 18.
We can't, correct.
Do you think that has been one of the reasons you've lost a generation or two?
For sure. So like the last 2.5 decades, every year we have been monitoring, or at least during my time with the Singapore Turf Club, that was the earlier part of 2000. So we always monitor the aging demographics and population of the punters, right? So while we realized that they were aging, an average of 60 over years old to 70 plus to then, like the late 60s. So there was always a lack of younger generations of horse racing enthusiasts. Hong Kong saw it way earlier. So they have a youth wing. They set aside the left wing for owners to bring their young kids, where they have no access to betting counters and they could take winning photos when the owner's horses won. So those are things that you do to cultivate the love of horse racing in the younger generations, not to encourage them to gamble, to bet on horses, to punt, but the sport of horse racing, right, is a sport of kings. So why restrict and disallow the younger generation from enjoying this sport?
Eric, you travel all over the world to many jurisdictions and to sales rings and know a raft of people who work in the racing industry. What would you say to people watching this in other racing jurisdictions? What warning should they take from the close of racing, first of all in Macau, but in this case in Singapore?
I think in a lot of, quite a number of countries, because horse racing, say Singapore, Hong Kong, even France, using the totalizator system, the government's perception is always that we put in a government person to ensure integrity, to check on the books, to audit. But what government or what governments around the world should realize is that you put a non-racing person to run horse racing, there's always a risk there, because end of the day, if their tenure is just 2 or 2 plus 2, 4 years, it's not long enough for them to develop a strategy to be able to steer the racing body, right? So you actually do need someone with a fair level of racing knowledge to have a decent amount of passion for horse racing, to come in and really improve on and to steer and set directions for the racetracks. So if it's just planting a few scholars, retired ministers or government persons, I think it's very challenging. First of all, it takes a good year or even 2 years to explain the sport of horse racing to this new chairman or new CEOs. And by the time they get a bit of understanding, they might be preparing to move on already. So the level of passion and interest for them to develop and grow horse racing is very different from someone who knows about racing.
Obviously, the situation has been known for a while now, Eric. Unbiasedly, from a man who sees racing all around the world, had Singapore racing got to the stage where it was worth saving?
Even after 5th October, I would die still thinking that Singapore racing should have continued or could have bounced back. You look at immediately since the announcement of the closure of Singapore racing, the level of interest is back on, and we have been attracting a lot of new race goers. Some they came for the very first time, and they've been back since then. And so, not even talking about the strategy in terms of wagering, I would say, especially for wagering, the Singapore racing product is still pretty good. After all, we were top 7 in the world in terms of betting turnover. Back then, 2010, 2011, yes, it has gone down a lot, but there are many ways and strategies to revive that turnover. And I just strongly believe that Singapore racing could bounce back and could be revived for sure, definitely.
There's some compelling comments there from Eric, who knows this place like the back of his hand, about the separation between government and racing and taking the betting away from the control of the racing club and therefore losing control of your destiny. We did ask the Singapore Turf Club if they were willing to comment on this. They chose not to, and in fact we are shooting this outside the track. They have been very gracious hosts and very polite about letting us go to the races here today, but they have not allowed our camera crew to go inside either at track work on Thursday or today for the final meeting. That is their choice. We're not going to come to their country and tell them or their government what they should or shouldn't do. But there is a feeling here that this isn't a government issue, that this is a case where the racing industry didn't advocate and stay strongly enough aligned with its government to have any power in the halls here of the Singapore government, and maybe a warning there for other racing jurisdictions. Of course, even today, on the last day of racing in Singapore, there were races to be run and won. One of those was the Singapore Gold Cup.
Dream Alliance is running on behind nose, and it's the Taba running the race of her life, and getting out late is Smart Star. Lim Sao Toro, but Smart Star's in for the fight, and so too is the Taba. Dream Alliance for a place. On the outside, Smart Star and Lim Sao Toro, they go to the line. I think Smart Star's won the Grand Gold Cup on an outsider. Lim Sao Toro in for the minor placing.
To delve deeper into the problems and issues here in Singapore, we spoke to Michael Cox, who is the editor of Idle Horse and a long-time writer and expert on the region. Well, Michael, few people follow the politics of Asian racing quite as closely as you. What went wrong here?
If I could summarise in 3 parts, I'd say lack of government influence and engagement, then the growth of the illegal betting here. But the death knell was in 2019, I believe, when Singapore Pools took control of betting from the Singapore Turf Club. And once the Singapore Turf Club weren't in control of their own source of funding, I think they were in trouble.
What about websites like a CityBet who operate in those grey areas? They're not illegal, but they don't put a lot of money back into the game. How damaging has that been to Singapore racing?
I think the problem with CityBet here, and CityBet originated in Malaysia and Singapore, so it's culturally accessible to people. I think the restriction by governments on the legal market opened up the illegal betting in a big way. And once that illegal betting becomes bigger than the home betting itself, then you've got problems.
There was a time when the difference between Hong Kong racing and Singapore wasn't that great. One has flourished, one has not. What do you think the Hong Kong Jockey Club did right that Singapore didn't do or did wrong?
I think Hong Kong is a more established presence, but I think government engagement and advocacy with government, you need strong leadership, and you need people within the halls of Parliament helping push politicians to support horse racing through, relenting on tax and giving racing the freedom to market itself in the way that it needs to.
What have you seen here in your many visits to Singapore that would be words or actions of warning for other racing jurisdictions around Asia and around the world?
I think that some of the forces here aren't unique to Singapore, the need for land, the decrease in popularity of racing in the mainstream society. But racing needs advocacy and needs support from government to survive. And I think that's the main warning there, is to get in front of government and fight for racing's case, that it's a contributor to society through tax and other ways.
Do you feel when you're in Singapore's CBD like you're in a racing town or a racing state, in this case a country, because it doesn't feel to have any racing presence in town?
Yeah, that was a big problem for the Singapore Turf Club, was the restrictions placed on it by the government in terms of its marketing and visibility in society. So it wasn't necessarily a lack of Singapore Turf Club wanting to be seen in society and wanting there to be known to be racing here, but the government restricting it through fears of problem gambling. But in effect, those restrictions create problems by allowing an illegal market to flourish.
Well, the sun is setting on the last ever race day here at Kranji. It's an odd feeling. It's quite sad. It's a very beautiful place. It could do with a lick of paint, but I suppose none of that matters anymore. The beers and the cheers are finished. It's going to be something else. But in racing, the magic is never too far away. Remember a few weeks ago, we introduced you to our little man, the horse from Cambridge stud we've adopted to take through the first couple of years of his career. Well, today at Randwick, while this was going on, little man's big brother, called Coewolf, went to the Epsom and did the family proud. Rather than going out on the death of Singapore racing, we'll go out on that. We'll see you again next Monday here on the Guerin Report at 8 p.m.
Racing to a narrow lead as Royal Patronage. Now the favourite's coming. Chao Wolf right down the outside. Tom Kidden tries to go with him, but Chao Wolf with the wind in his sails draws away for a big win in the Epsom. Beating Tom Kidden, Photo third, Royal Patronage and Kovalika.